Hello, my darling. Thank you for joining me today. I have something of an exciting treat, a multi-chapter story that you probably remember from your childhood. It is called Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and it was written by Lewis Carroll in 1865. This will be a multi-part series, so if you happen to fall asleep early on, don't worry. There will be plenty to listen to coming up. Before we begin, I would like for you to relax, take a deep breath in, and let it out slowly. And if you'd like, you can close your eyes as I read to you. Chapter 1. Down the Rabbit Hole. Alice was beginning to get very tired of sitting by her sister on the bank and of having nothing to do. Once or twice she had peeped into her sister's book, but it had no pictures or conversations. And what is the use of a book, thought Alice, without pictures or conversations? So she was considering in her own mind, for the hot day made her feel very sleepy and slow-minded, whether the pleasure of making a daisy chain would be worth the trouble of getting up and picking the daisies, when suddenly a white rabbit with pink eyes ran very close by. There was nothing so very remarkable in that, nor did Alice think it was so very much out of the way to hear the rabbit itself, as he exclaimed, oh dear, I shall be late." When she thought it over afterwards, it occurred to her that she ought to have wondered at this, but at the time this all seemed quite natural. When the rabbit actually took a watch out of his waistcoat pocket and looked at it, and then hurried on, Alice jumped to her feet, for it flashed across her mind that she had never before seen a rabbit with either a waistcoat or a watch to take out of it. And, burning with curiosity, she ran across the field after it, and fortunately was just in time to see it pop down a large rabbit hole under a ledge. In another moment, down went Alice after it, never once considering how in the world she would get out again. The rabbit hole went straight on like a tunnel for some way, and then dipped suddenly down, so suddenly that Alice had not a moment to think about stopping herself before she found herself falling down a very deep well. Either the well was very deep, or she fell very slowly, for she had plenty of time as she went down to look about her and wonder what was going to happen next. First, she tried to take a look down and make out where she was falling, but it was too dark to see anything. And then she looked at the sides of the well and noticed that they were filled with cupboards and bookshelves. Here and there she saw maps and pictures hung upon pegs. She took down a jar from one of the shelves as she passed it and saw that it was labeled orange marmalade, but to her great disappointment, it was empty. She did not like to drop the jar for fear of killing somebody, so she managed to put it into one of the cupboards as she fell fast down next to it. Well, thought Alice to herself. After such a fall as this, I shall think nothing of tumbling down the stairs. How brave they'll all think of me at home. Why, I wouldn't say anything about it, even if I fell off the top of my house. This was very likely true. Down, down, down. Would the fall never come to an end? I wonder how many miles I've fallen by this time, she asked aloud. I must be getting somewhere near the center of the earth. Let me see. That would be about 4,000 miles down, I think. For, you see, Alice had learned several things of this sort in her lessons in the schoolroom, and though this was not a very good opportunity for showing off her knowledge, as there was no one to listen to her, still, she felt it was a good practice to say it out loud. Yes, that's about the right distance. But then I wonder what latitude or longitude I've gotten to. Alice, of course, had no idea what latitude was, or longitude either, but thought they were nice, grand words to say. Presently, she began again. I wonder if I shall fall right through the earth. How funny it'll seem to come out among the people that walk with their heads pointed downwards. The antipathies, I think. She was rather glad there was no one listening this time, as she didn't think that sounded like the right word at all. But I shall have to ask them what the name of their country is, you know. Please, ma'am, is this New Zealand or Australia? And she tried to curtsy as she spoke. Fancy curtsying as you're falling through the air. Do you think you could manage it? And what an ignorant little girl she'll think me for asking. No, it'll never do to ask. Perhaps I shall see it written up somewhere. Down, down, down. Alice kept falling. There was nothing else to do, so Alice soon began talking again. Dinah'll miss me very much tonight, I should think. Dinah was her cat. I hope they'll remember her saucer of milk at tea time. Dinah, my dear, I wish you were down here with me. There are no mice in the air, I'm afraid, but you might catch a bat, and that's very much like a mouse, you know. But do cats eat bats, I wonder? And here Alice began to get rather sleepy, and she went on saying to herself, in a dreamy sort of way, do cats eat bats? Do cats eat bats? And sometimes, do bats eat cats? For you see, she couldn't answer either question, so it didn't much matter which way she put it. She felt that she was dozing off, and had just begun to dream that she was walking hand in hand with Dinah, and saying to her very earnestly, Now, Dinah, tell me the truth. Did you ever eat a bat? When suddenly, thump, thump, down she came upon a heap of sticks and dry leaves, and her fall was over. Alice was not hurt, and she jumped up on her feet in a moment. She looked up, but it was all dark overhead. Before her was another long passage, and the white rabbit was still in sight, hurrying down it. There was not a moment to be lost. Away went Alice like the wind, and was just in time to hear it say, as it turned a corner, Oh, my ears and whiskers, how late it's getting. She was close behind the rabbit, but the rabbit ran faster, and soon she could no longer see him. She found herself alone in a long, low hall, which was lit up by a row of lamps hanging from the ceiling. There were doors all around the hall, but they all looked locked, and when Alice had been down one side and up the other. She tried every door. She walked sadly back down the middle, wondering how she would ever get out again. Suddenly, she came upon a little three-legged table, all made of solid glass. There was nothing on it except a tiny golden key, and Alice's first thought was that it might belong to one of the doors down the hall. But alas, either the locks were too large or the key was too small. But at any rate, this key would not open any of them. However, on the second time around, she came upon a low curtain she had not noticed before, and behind it was a little door about 15 inches high. She tried the little golden key in the lock, and to her great delight, it fit. Alice opened the door and found that it led to a small passage, not much larger than a rat's hole. She knelt down and looked along the passage into the loveliest garden she had ever seen. How she longed to get out of that dark hall and wander about among those beds of flowers and see the cool fountains. But she could not even get her head through the doorway. And she thought, even if my head could go through, it would be of very little use to me without my shoulders. Oh, how I wish I could fold myself up like a telescope. I think I could, if only I knew how to begin. For you see, so many out-of-the-way things had happened lately that Alice had begun to think that very few things were really impossible. There seemed to be no use in waiting by the tiny door, so she went back to the table, half hoping she might find another key, or at any rate, a book of rules for folding people up like telescopes. This time, she found a little bottle on the table, which was certainly not here before, said Alice, and around the neck of the bottle was a paper label with the words, "Drink me," beautifully printed on it in large letters. It was all very well to say, "Drink me," but the wise little Alice was not going to do that in any hurry. "No," she said, "I'll look around first and see whether it's marked poison." Luckily for Alice, she had read several nice little histories about children who had gotten burned or eaten up by wild beasts and other unpleasant things, all because they would not remember the simple rules their friends had taught them, such as a red-hot poker will burn you if you hold it for too long, and if you cut your finger very deeply with a knife, it usually bleeds. And she had never forgotten that. If you drink much from a bottle marked poison, she knew that would almost certainly disagree with her, sooner or later. However, this bottle was not marked poison, so Alice ventured to taste it, and, finding it very nice, it had in fact a sort of mixed flavor of cherry tart, custard, pineapple, roast turkey, toffee, and hot buttered toast. She very soon finished it off. "What a curious feeling," said Alice. "I must be folding up like a telescope." And so it was indeed. She was now only 10 inches high, and her face brightened up at the thought that she was now the right size for going through the little door into that lovely garden. First, however, she waited for a few minutes to see if she was going to shrink any further. She felt a little nervous about this, for it might end, you know, said Alice to herself. It might going out altogether. It might end like a candle. I wonder what I should be like then. and she tried to fancy what the flame of a candle is like after the candle is blown out, for she could not remember ever having seen such a thing. After a while, finding that nothing more had happened, she decided on going into the garden at once. But, alas for poor Alice, when she got to the door, she found she had forgotten her little golden key, and when she went back to the table for it, she found she could not possibly reach it. She could see it quite plainly through the glass, and she tried her best to climb up one of the legs of the table, but it was glass and slippery, and when she had tired herself out with trying, little Alice sat down on the floor and cried. "Oh, come on," she said to herself. "There's no use in crying like this. Stop crying right now." She generally gave herself very good advice, even though she seldom followed it, and sometimes she scolded herself so severely as to bring tears into her own eyes. And once she remembered trying to hit her own ears for having cheated herself in a game of croquet she was playing against herself, for this curious child was very fond of pretending to be two people. But it's no use now, thought poor Alice, to pretend to be two people. Why, there's hardly enough of me left to make one respectable person. Soon her eye fell on a little glass box that was sitting under the table. She opened it and found in it a very small cake, on which the words, "Eat me," were beautifully marked in crayons. "Well, I'll eat it," said Alice, "and if it makes me grow larger, I can reach the key, and if it makes me grow smaller, I can creep under the door. So either way, I'll get into that garden, and I don't care any more what happens." She ate a little bite and said anxiously to herself, which way will I grow? Will I shrink?" She held her hand on the top of her head to feel which way it was growing, and she was quite surprised to find that she remained the same size. To be sure, this generally happens when one eats cake, but Alice had gotten so much into the way of expecting nothing but out-of-the-way things to happen, that it seemed quite dull and silly for life to be so common now. She decided her only option was to finish eating the cake, and she did.